We are at 63rd and Western, and this is the building where the draft boards, 32 draft boards covering the whole south side of Chicago, were located here. And we rented an office in the building as a bookstore, and this is where we got into the draft board offices and removed a lot of the material, mountains of files and cards, and burned them outside. We did not endanger the building, or much less endanger the life of anybody in there or anywhere around here.
Good afternoon. So I want to thank Betty and Joe for inviting me. I really appreciate the invitation. I came to Chicago in 1965 as an undergraduate in college. And of course that was the, I won't say the height, but surely a critical time in the anti-war movement. And I remember being in a lot of demonstrations, but I have to confess that I didn't have the courage that many of you in this room had to take direct action to destroy draft files. So I want to thank you for your courage and your commitment at great personal cost and sacrifice to bring attention to the injustice in the war, and particularly to the way in which the war impacted black and brown communities. That was, as I said, courageous. Joe said that half the people in this room are ex-felons. Usually, if I'm in a room where half the people in the room are ex-felons, they're a different demographic than you all. So, but I was telling Margaret that one of the things that I've worked on very hard for the last 8 years is to reduce the number of people in our jails and to reduce the number of people in the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center where she works. You know, we have a criminal justice system that disproportionately impacts black and brown people. We've worked hard to reduce the jail population, but it's still true that 86% of the people in the jail are black and brown. Now in the county, 26% are in the Latinx community, 24% are African American, so that's half the population. But again, 86% of the people, even when we reduce the jail population by 50%, are black and brown. So we've got some real challenges, continual challenges about race and equity, and surely those challenges were part of what those of you who went to prison were addressing when you destroyed draft files. So I came to thank you. I think it's important that elected officials, government officials, acknowledge the errors of government, and surely the Vietnam War was a terrible and tragic error in this country's history. And those of you who had the courage to challenge the narrative that this was in some way necessary or critical or important or right should be applauded. You know, as I said, I think it's important for government to acknowledge errors and in this instance, a tragic error.
We have another 15 minutes. Take your time, and I see a lot of people enjoying talking with one another.
When he got out of the car, he said there was a policeman coming toward him with a gun drawn, and he said Charles with Tom with empty hands came and stuck his hand out and introduced himself. Hi. And he said the guy had a gun pointed at him and had a holster in order to shake hands with him. So he said, after disarmament. I wanted to mention too that we should not forget the Kings Bay 7 Plowshares defendants who are in prison, in jail right now. Trident submarine base and damaged, they worked at 3 different parts of it, damaging Trident, some of the Trident symbols, and I think pouring blood on the cone of a Trident missile or something. Georgia. And 7 of them, including Phil Berrigan's widow, Liz McAllister, and I think in a group in which I think the youngest person was 55 and the oldest was 79, and they are looking at potentially 25 years in prison. He and I met about a year after he got out of prison in 1976, planning the Continental Walk for Disarmament and Social Justice. And I like to tell my kids that the first project we ever did together was to make a bomb. But it was just a paper mache bomb. It was for some kind of a peace march or something like that. But what I wanted to share was a little bit of his prison poetry. And then some things that he wrote after prison. Peace for the pacifist comes. When the last weapon of the last war has finally been surrendered, and the last person with a hateful harvest agrees to leave scythe suspended, when the final curse from angry lips has choked in the throat and is ended by the horrible sight of a starving child malnourished with belly distended, when the battle cry for victory echoes back over centuries, dead-ended, then a great smile will dance on my face for the journey that God has forfended, and the joy in my heart will ascend to the sky as I shout to the world, it is ended. And humanity sings of the peace that it brings. We will laugh and we will cry, and the whole day long we'll remember that song from the troubadours of love so ancient, and as tears fill our eyes, we will all realize that the spell of the venerable sage has just come to be, with the simplicity of writers on many a page, and the dream kept alive by the work and the drive and the handouts to beggars and bums will enrapture the earth as we witness new birth, and peace for the pacifist comes.
Yeah, the only thing that comes to mind that's impressing itself on me now is the importance of community, and I think I've said that already. But I have my second and third and maybe fourth thoughts about that, and my girlfriend at the time's parents were encouraging her to encourage me to just go to Canada. And Durkin or Sweeney can verify. I think Durkin, somehow you had procured for me identity papers to go to Canada. I ultimately decided that I didn't want to leave my community. My community, Casa Maria community, my family. I'm one of 11 kids. Community was important enough that I decided I didn't want to be cut off by that border and threat of prison. I'd rather do time and then be out and kind of not lose that connection. So I'm sometimes curious if there's a Charles Reamer up in Canada somewhere. Barry Bondhus was really, I think, the original draft file destroyer. It's such a lovely story that, you know, I mean, these draft files are shit, you know, and we're going to show that to the world, and it dumped 2 buckets on the, and so pity the poor draft people that had to work on those. So I think they probably didn't. But he was at Sandstone and was pretty isolated. You know, he was a pretty lone voice in the wilderness at that time. there was a woman who was the Central Committee for Conscience Objection official prison visitor. Earl Cedarburg, this little woman, elderly woman who was, you know, about this high and would give everybody a big hug. She was allowed to come in and visit the draft resistors, the tax resistors that were there. We had a community, and we had one night where we could have music, and we would play this rock music that the guards didn't, you know, it's like, oh geez, I don't want to, I'll walk by and look in, but I don't want to stand around and watch these guys. You know? But, you know, we had some real support. There was a black guy who was trying to educate me on sort of, he had me go listen to old LP records of Martin Luther King's speeches and so forth. And he had grown up in a mixed race high school. And so he was just trying to educate me. He invited me in to the black, there was a black, what was it called? I remember the organization. So
Black History Club or
something like that.
African American Club.
And he said, "Why don't you come with me?" It's like, okay, you sure? Okay, yeah, come on, you should come over here. So I come and come up to the door of this, and there are two of these black guys with shaved heads, been bulking up, one on either side, and there's no guard around. Walk in, I said, "How would you do this? There's no guard in here, there's no guard outside?" He said, "We put in for years to have a Black History Club. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Next day they said, you can have it." Oh, that was, yeah. That was interesting introduction. I came from Burbank, South Dakota. There weren't a lot of black people around. It was, yeah, interesting learning experience for me. And this old guy, Doc, was, you know, kind of teaching me a little bit about black history and inviting me to this group and so forth. So it was an interesting time.
Well, I don't know if this is at all appropriate, but I would just like to read Johnny Baranski's last haiku, and he passed away in January 2018, and on his deathbed he wrote his final haiku. Long before I came, long after I leave, blossoming hair. My daughter said, "Dad looked away, and I thought he was having a seizure." And then you said, "Get him paper." And I got him paper, because I knew that look. It was that look, I'm going to write something here. And that's when he wrote that, and that is on his headstone.
How soon before he died?
This was 2 days before he died.
Grace and I have said we kind of hope there's an afterlife because we like to think of Johnny and Tom being reunited.
Yeah.